Hi, everybody. I don't know who's here yet. Let's see. Oh, look at that. There's people here already. How sweet. All right. Allow me a moment to get used to where everything is here. Let's see. All right. Let me shrink my window here so I can see the comments on the YouTube page. Maybe there's a way I can see them live. My chat window that I just don't know about yet. Can everybody hear me okay? Audio good? Camera good? Well, I have to presume so. If you can't hear me, leave a comment or something. All right. Today we are here on the very first episode of the Cult of Copy show. If you're not aware what the Cult of Copy is, we are a group of professionals and hobbyists who are fans and followers of, I guess you could call it the art and science of persuasion. Uh, we have a group, a private group that anyone can ask to join. So if you're not already a member and you're watching this or listening to it as a podcast later, you can go to cultofcopy.com, and that redirects to our Facebook group page where you can request to join. My name is Colin Terry. If I was more prepared, I might have one of those little lower third things down here on the live hangout. Maybe I can smack one up here real quick. Let's see. No, that's not it. Zane's going to be so mad at me. He showed me all these things, and I done forgot them. Here we go. I think that's it. Let's see. No, that's lower third. I don't want that. Hmm. Control room. No. Terrible. I don't know. Maybe it's cameraman. Oh well. So as you can see, we're doing great for a first episode. If you're listening on, I guess, the audio podcast, maybe we will clean this up and edit it. But the show is recorded live as a weekly Google Hangout, and this is what I'm affectionately calling episode 0, because I haven't worked all the bugs out of this yet. I have no idea what I'm doing, basically, but we're not going to let that stop us. So in order to sort of give people an idea of, I guess, the context of the group, I mentioned that we like to discuss persuasion, right? And most people are sort of scared of persuasion. They see it as sort of like an evil power that only bad people use, and it dips into manipulation, but I don't think that's true. And even if it is true that there are evil people who are skilled at persuasion, the purpose of the group that I started was to explore those things, let's say, the darker side of persuasion, to see what good ideas and useful things that we could bring over and use ethically in our own businesses. So With that being said, what I picked today for an introductory topic for the group is we're going to talk about a world-famous con man named Count Victor Lustig. And he was active in the 20s, the 1920s, and what he is most famous for is selling the Eiffel Tower for scrap twice. And he was a very interesting character, and one of the things he's famous for is having written a list of 10 rules for successful con artists to follow. And we're going to talk about those, and then we're going to talk about some things that, in my observation, are very useful to imitate Victor Lustig. And we're going to look at those in the context of his most famous con, which I mentioned was selling the Eiffel Tower for scrap. So I have my notes here. We're going to pull those up. My good old mind map. Once again, my advanced preparation pays off dividends, right? See, there's my mind map. This, by the way, is my office. This is where I get my work done. Let's see. We did an intro. I told you about the cult. Told you about the show. Did I tell you about the show? I think I started to tell you about myself, and then I got caught up in the fact that it doesn't say my name on the screen. My name's Colin Terry. I used to be a professional sales and marketing copywriter, which meant I wrote advertisements for clients as a freelancer. But what I do now is mainly just run the group that I mentioned, where I do sell a newsletter and training for sales and marketing copywriting, if that's your kind of thing. That's not the sole focus of the group. I know we have a lot of hobbyists in there who are just interested in the subject, which is why I'm making a show for the wider world who are interested in our topic but may not necessarily be professionals like myself and my colleagues. So that's me. And then about this show, like I said, we're recording it as a Google Hangout. It will eventually be on YouTube. And I'm also going to export the audio to be a podcast on iTunes and Android, if I can manage it. So whatever platform you prefer that you happen to be listening to this show on, if you like the topics we're going to talk about today, subscribe, because I'm going to be doing this every week, and I promise I will get better with practice over time. I have to. I bought all kinds of equipment. Let's see. We have... Okay, let's start with the Eiffel Tower story. Now, I don't know how many people watching are familiar with who Count Victor Lustig was. He was from mainland Europe. I want to say the kingdom, not the kingdom. He was from Bohemia, which I believe is in modern-day Poland. Coincidentally, he called himself a count. I don't know how. I imagine his credentials are pretty dubious, but I'm actually a knight of the now non-existent kingdom of Bohemia. Here are my fake credentials as a leader of a cult. So there's my knighthood, and over there's my doctorate, and over there's my minister's license. So I'm technically the Reverend Dr. Sir Colin Terry. There's my monkey painting. Some of you guys helped me buy that. Anyways, the point is, he's a count in the same non-existent place that I bought my fake knighthood from. So that should give you an idea of what kind of con artist he was. Once he was sort of traveling around doing his thing, because, you know, the con man's got to stay on the road, can't stay in one place too long because you get busted. He was reading a newspaper, and at this time, in I believe it was 1925, of course the Eiffel Tower is famous as a symbol of Paris. They love it, you know, universally recognized and identified with the city, and the people who live there, you know, like it. But that wasn't always the case. It was originally built for a World's Fair, and it was supposed to be disassembled and moved. And what happened is that plan kind of fell through because they didn't have the money, and also they didn't have the money to maintain it, so it was getting all rusty and nasty. And the people of Paris at the time felt like it was out of place. Big, crazy, naked metal girder structure in a town that had like the Arc de Triomphe and the Louvre and all these fancy old, classical looking French buildings. And here's this big, ugly, skeletal metal thing that's rusting to pieces. So this gave Victor an idea. So what he did is he went to Paris, he set up shop, I believe he got himself an office, and he set up a meeting with all of the prominent scrap metal dealers around Paris. And he had this meeting, he brought them all together, and he told them that they had to keep this secret. That was part of their agreement for being invited to this meeting. But the city of Paris wanted to sell the Eiffel Tower for scrap, and it needed to be disassembled. And what he had all these scrap metal dealers come to this meeting for was to give a bid through him to the city to take it down. And then once the agreement had been in place and work had begun, then the city would announce it, and then the few people who liked the tower wouldn't be able to complain because it was already a done deal, right? So he picks a guy. That guy, puts in a bid. Victor collects the money and leaves Paris successfully. It worked so good, a few months later, I believe 6 months later, he came back to do it again. And it worked up to the point that one of the new batch of scrap metal dealers that he invited the second time was suspicious enough to contact the police beforehand, before the deal went too far, and he got found out. Fortunately for him, he was able to flee Paris and didn't get busted that time, although he didn't get away with the con. We're going to talk about a couple more specific details in the story in a bit when we get into the true genius of Victor Lustig and the details that we can borrow from him to use ourselves. Let's see. The first thing I want to talk about, to give you an idea of why I think it's worth studying a guy like Victor, con artistry is essentially salesmanship, right? But it's very, very fast. You need to, I forget who was the originator, but someone out there in sales and marketing land says that in order to get people to buy things from you, they need to know you first. And then once they know you, they have to like you. And then if they like you, that helps them come to trust you when you're making them promises of things that you're going to do. Well, the trick with con artists compared to salespeople is con artists, first of all, they can lie. So that gives them a big advantage. The second advantage they have is they're very skilled at creating these contexts where you come to know, like, and trust them very, very quickly, because they don't have a lot of time to wine and dine you and build up a relationship over a period of days. They usually have like an hour or something to pull off this con. Victor's were a little bit longer, but you need to basically meet someone and then very quickly become a close enough friend that they're going to trust you and kind of go in on something that maybe sounds shady and too good to be true, right? These are some of the rules. Victor famously wrote this list of 10 rules for con men, which are still used today. Even some salespeople are familiar with it. But man, that guy, unabashed, unashamed. He's like, yeah, I'm a con artist. Here's the rules for how to do it. So these are pretty good, and what I want you to listen for is how there's very few pieces of advice in this list that are specific to being a con artist. You'll be able to see very easily how you can use these in sales context, especially face-to-face. So rule number 1, be a good listener. He says the myth of the fast-talking, silver-tongued con man should be ignored, which I think is funny because he's almost like the picture anyone has in their head of this fake European aristocrat who's actually just a con artist. He's basically the template for that. But he says listening is key. And if you listen, people will tell you how to persuade them of, nearly anything, right? Next rule, never appear bored. Show nothing but interest in your victim. Of course, a salesperson wouldn't call their prospect a victim necessarily, but interest is maybe one of the most addictive things that there are, and people just genuinely don't get enough of it in their life. And being able to convey a genuine interest all by itself is sort of contagious. So people who are enthusiastic about what they're doing get other people enthusiastic about it. It catches on, right? Well, if you're enthusiastic, if you show enthusiasm and interest in what your prospect is interested in, what they're all about, that feeds into their own enthusiasm. You'll see their energy level start to pick up, and it's flattering that you find them fascinating, and it doesn't have to be fake. One of the skills that I recommend people try to develop is the ability to be genuinely interested in almost anything. That's one of, I think, my most valuable skills. Is there's always some angle, no matter what I might be talking about something with someone, even if I'm not generally interested at all, there's always some angle that I find fascinating to be able to start a conversation about. Rule number 3 is agree with the victim's politics. Wait for the other person to reveal any political opinions, then agree with them. Victor was obviously wanting to not have to try very hard to find victims. Whoever was in front of him, he wanted to turn them into a likely candidate to get conned, right? So he would match whatever they gave him, and he had to kind of wait for them to spit it out so he could agree with it. He didn't really have the luxury of researching them ahead of time most of the time. We as marketing people do. We can research our audiences ahead of time. Many people recommend that in business, if you're sort of like a personality in front of your own business, that you don't get involved in politics, right? You don't bring up which party you vote for, who you support, or which social groups you think need to go down the drain, or any of those kind of things. I personally don't follow those rules because I'm sort of, I guess you would call it a provocateur on Facebook sometimes, but I consider that practice for persuasive writing. But I find it interesting that he was a bit of a chameleon, and he would take what you give him and give it right back to you. The next rule seems kind of obvious. He's like, agree with the victim's religion. For most people, I would say their politics and their religion are kind of intertwined. And my own interpretation of that, if you want to back out of it and not really think of it in terms of politics and religion, the things that matter to people about their professed religion and their professed politics are values, their core values, what matters to them, what do they want to protect and preserve, and what doesn't matter to them, what's something that doesn't affect them in any way. And then, of course, with politics and religion, we're talking about like what will they not stand for, what are they against, with every fiber of their being, what do they think is just wrong in the world. In my work, I call those values and villains. And I recommend the same thing. There are two ways to go about it. Either you find out what your audience's values and villains are, reflect those back to them, and they'll make them like you. Or if you have the luxury of it and you want to take the time to build up an audience around you and be authentic, then you just broadcast what your own values and villains are. And the audience who likes you will stick around, and the audience who doesn't will get gone. And you end up with an audience comprised of people who have the same values and villains that you do. So then by that point, it works the same as reflecting their own values and villains back to them. You just built the group up that had the same values and villains that you do in the first place. Hopefully everybody follows so far. I'm still not used to the little chat channel. Oh, here we go. I guess I have to keep hitting refresh. Moving on, what was the next rule? Hint at sex talk without being explicit. That was one I always thought was funny. Oh, gross. Check me out. I'm big, fatty, in shorts. Today's the first day I got to wear shorts, by the way. I've been waiting for the weather to catch up. It's nice and warm. Um, so, sex talk without being explicit, that goes right into tricking people into going into sort of like close friend territory, right? People usually don't talk about topics like sex or intimacy or things that are, sort of protected speech. You only talk about those things with people you are close with, typically, or at least people you know you're going to agree with. So he's already matching you on politics and religion, and if he hints at sort of dirty wink wink not for public consumption kind of opinions and he pulls those out of you, now you're buddies automatically. You can't help but think of him as a friend because you're talking about private things which you only normally talk about with your friends. That's a trick I've talked about before in the group called the Benjamin Franklin effect, where if you ask someone to do you a favor, small favor, lend me a pen, do you have a quarter I can borrow, something like that, it changes the way they think of you because now they can't be mad at you or think they dislike you because they did you a favor. And why would they do that if they didn't at least like you a little bit, right? So let's see. So yeah, bringing up the dirty talk, like we said, puts you in a familiar territory with them. You're closer friends than you began if you start sharing secrets about that kind of thing, right? And if they don't go for it, it's back out of it. You only hinted at it. You didn't bring it up. You're not the vulgar one. Sort of let them bring it up. It's good stuff. Let's see. Never discuss illness unless they bring up the subject. What's interesting about that one is that a lot of con artistry has to do with sob stories about so-and-so is sick and you need the money and blah, blah, blah. Victor went more after affluent marks, and that was sort of considered rude and sort of begging, and it put him, it ruined the illusion he liked to create of aristocracy and being well off. So it's interesting that he puts that out there as a rule because he didn't want sympathy, he didn't want pity. Those were emotions that he didn't want to enter into the equation. So he would only bring them up if the other party did, usually talking about themselves. It wasn't really something that he included as part of his message. Never ask about personal circumstances. That one's kind of interesting because a lot of times in sales context, you do want to ask questions about, well, what's your budget? Or, what are your sales numbers? How does that compare to competitors? It's the kind of thing where you are probing their direct situation. But what Victor wanted to do is make you like him first before any of that came up. He wanted to set the context of that. Like we said, you want to know him, like him, and trust him. So he wouldn't ask about your circumstances because he didn't want to be seen as, probing at you. He wanted you to offer that stuff up to him willingly. Let's see. Never talk yourself up. Your brilliance should be obvious. I always like that one. We'll talk a little bit more about his personal affect in a minute, but the idea of not talking yourself up is one that I like because one of the things that I try to do for myself and I try to do for my clients and teach people how to do, maybe it's worked before you've come here, but what I try to do is make sure that my audience kind of knows who I am and what I'm about before they show up. I don't necessarily think it's beneficial for me to be the person introducing myself. In situations where I'm in front of an audience that doesn't know me or doesn't know what I normally talk about or what my work is or anything like that, I try to let it come through in conversations and then let them ask. I usually don't introduce myself as, a copywriter or a marketing expert or anything like that. I'm just Colin. And then through the course of conversations, we'll talk about some things. People will be like, well, what is it you do again? And that's usually a lot more beneficial context to be in. I guess rule number 9, never be messy or untidy. I'm a total failure at that one. Um, obviously. Uh, but again, because of who he chose as his victims, which were higher end, wealthy, sophisticated kinds of people, appearances, especially attention to detail, were very important because those little off details are what would throw people off. Lots of beginning salespeople and entrepreneurs will do this kind of thing where they're kind of faking it until they make it, where they project a much bigger profile than what they actually have, in order to, impress people, right? Because attention to detail is important when you're trying to make a story real. I think the hidden lesson there for, I guess you would call it personality marketers, people like me that, like, I'm an internet person and I make my living kind of being myself online. The lesson there is not necessarily that things have to be a certain way, very proper, very, like I'm not in a business suit, I'm not wearing a necktie, but the appearance that I'm giving off is deliberate because I want an audience who's comfortable and casual in the same way that I like to be comfortable and casual. I'm not presenting something that would ring false. So, like, if I put on a suit to project a certain image, I could probably do it if I practiced and acted and tried to be, typical business guy. I would have to shave, obviously, but it would be a facade that would eventually crumble, and I'd eventually get some detail wrong. I wouldn't know about some fancy kind of wristwatch or, I don't know, suit or something. Can you tell I'm only imagining what suit-wearing business dudes talk about? I have no idea, but it would eventually be found out because any facade that you put up needs work to maintain, and Victor was very careful to make sure that his facade was perfect. Let's see. Never get drunk or take drugs. I fail. I fail again. I'm not getting drunk. I'm having a beer, but he would always withhold doing those things to. I think he did it because he wanted to portray this air of trustworthiness and eliteness, and again, it had to do with who his victims were, right? For me, I'm more of the guy where I earn your trust because I'm the kind of person you would like to have a beer with. See, it's subliminal, but also I like to drink beer. So if we're going to hang out, that's going to be a connection point. So I kind of broadcast it. For those of you, I guess, listening on the audio-only version, I'm drinking a beer right now on camera. Ooh, but again, most of his advice had to do specifically with who he was going after, and there's something to be said in business. One of the big mistakes I see a lot of clients make in business is they think when your doors are open, you take every customer that comes your way, right? You take every deal, every offer of someone who wants to give you money to do work, and you should be more selective. You should pick clients and customers that are going to further your career with the work that you do for them, right? So if you have a bigger goal, don't take everybody who comes in through the door. Be selective. Even be proactive, the way a con artist would. He's not going to pick random people off the street to con. He's going to set up a context so he meets rich, preferably dumb people who are easy to fool. I'm not saying to do that on your business side, but if you want high-end clientele, don't accept work from low-end clientele. Focus your business around identifying, going after, and soliciting these higher-end customers that you want if that's the kind of business you want to have. Hopefully everybody follows so far. I know there's a delay in the comments here. Let me refresh them. So those are Victor's rules there for con artists. Now hopefully you see what I mean. Most of those pretty good advice for salespeople. Not so much the details, but the caring about your appearance, the caring of the values that you portray. All immensely valuable. So Victor clearly thought like a salesman. He just happened to not want to sell real things. I have in my notes here that this is where the first advertising spot would go if this was like a for real show instead of just episode 0. And that works out good because we're like right at 30 minutes. The halfway point, perfect spot for a commercial. So pretend I had one. In fact, what can we talk about? I have, and for those of you who are already subscribers to my newsletter, this last issue I put out was actually going to be the first chapter in a book I'm working on. It was all about mastery, right? How to quickly gain mastery over a subject and portray yourself as being a master of that subject without having to, you know, have years of practice or knowledge or expertise. Not for the point of tricking people, but to so that they'll put their trust in you and see you as an expert, so you can kind of profit from that field. I ended up writing twice as much as I needed for the chapter of a book, so I had a ton of extra material. So I thought, why not do a webinar? So if you're interested in that subject and you want to know more, there's a post about it in the Cult of Copy. The webinar is going to be Wednesday, April 9th, next week, at this time, 2 p.m. And we're going to talk about 13 things you can do to rapidly acquire and portray mastery of any subject. Now, it's $50 to attend the webinar live, and the trick is if you're a subscriber to the newsletter already, it's only $20. But a subscription to the newsletter is only $20 a month. So if you subscribe to the newsletter, you get the newsletter, of course, which is weekly-ish issues, more than one a month, but not on a set schedule. So you get multiple issues of the newsletter in a month, plus you can get the webinar for only $20. So that's a better deal. You'll get more stuff, a couple of issues of the newsletter, plus the webinar and the recording. You get the recording too. Or if you don't want to subscribe and dedicate yourself to a monthly thing, it's $50. You get the recording, plus you get the issue of the newsletter that the webinar is based on. So there we go. That was my practice shot at an advertisement here on the show. So get used to it because we're going to have ads. I'm going to sell them. So now that we've had our commercial break, let's get into talking about let's see. There we go. Now we're going to talk about some of the things that Victor did as part of his con where he sold the Eiffel Tower for scrap that I think are going to be specifically helpful to business people like us. Persuasion engineers is a fancy way to say it, right? So first things first, he put off these authority markers, right? So he had the title. He was a count. It was one of those things where, in Europe in the 20s, there were lots of royalty from lots of different countries, and they're well dressed and traveling all over Europe and throwing money around and doing deals and involved in politics and blah blah blah. I don't know that he used his count title when he pulled off this particular con, but it's just an example of these authority markers that he would give off. So when he established himself as being a some sort of official from the government who was authorized to make this deal wherein he would sell the Eiffel Tower for scrap, like I said, he got an office. He got dinner reservations at some fancy place where he had all of these guys come and meet him in quote-unquote secret. I'm sure his appearance was dead on. I'm sure he had official paperwork that, all looked very proper, probably had credentials and identification, all to back this up. Not to put it in front of your face, but as if it was a foregone conclusion. It was there when he needed it, right? The next thing that he was good at, in this particular con anyway, because we talked before about how he just sort of had to go with whoever ended up in front of him. On this particular con, he did background intelligence, right? So he had uh, he had information that helped him put it together. So first we talked about how he got the idea for the con reading the newspaper, and he saw a situation in a city that he could take advantage of. And if you read that newsletter that I just mentioned on mastery, that was one of the things I talked about, was reading things that are relevant in your niche that will give you ideas for all kinds of things, for free content to share with your audience, for products that you can create if they describe problems, ways to earn favors from people if you bring stories to their attention that they can find valuable that you didn't know about. Lots and lots of ways, but he would gather intelligence in this way. He was always on the lookout for a new con or a new trick to play. Unlike some people who are less famous who got caught, he didn't have one con that he did over and over until it was burned and then tried to run away and do it again. In this case, he did try to do that one twice, but he's got a long list of things he's known for. He once conned Al Capone in America. He traveled to America. He conned Al Capone out of $5,000 by convincing him to invest $50,000, which he took, held, did nothing with it, then like 6 months later returned it all and said, investment didn't work out, here's your money back. Capone was so impressed with how honest Lustig was, he gave him $5,000 for his trouble. So he made $5,000 for being honest when he was nothing of the sort. But that was another con that he did on many people. Another time he sold people a machine that allegedly copied $100 bills, but the catch was it took 6 hours to do it. So he would take a $100 bill, put it in, sit around, shoot the breeze with you for 6 hours. It would spit out the original and the copy. Then he would put another one in, and you would buy the machine from him for like $25,000 or whatever. And mind you, in the 20s, this is a huge amount of money. 6 hours later, it would spit out another $100 bill, just like promised. But then you go to do it a third time, and 6 hours after that, it's only blank paper because he had only preloaded the machine with $200 bills in the first place. But by that time, he had been gone for 12 hours, so you weren't going to catch him. Anyways, you get the idea. He was constantly on the lookout for new ideas and opportunities that he could profit from. Let's see. He was also flexible. We're going to talk about this in a minute on a later point, what I mean about flexibility. But con artists have to be good at this because they have to think on their feet, because they're always almost about to get found out, right? Like, not only do they have this deal to get someone to say yes to, but they have to get away with it too. So because of that, they develop this remarkable flexibility as opposed to just being rigid and stuck to a certain plan, which I think is beneficial for business owners and marketers and charismatic people who are just building audiences on the internet for whatever reason. You don't want to get stuck to a model or a plan that you made. You want to be able to be flexible and dynamic and accommodate different opportunities or failings, hiccups, roadblocks, any of these things that come your way. You don't want to be so tied to a plan that you have to scrap the whole project. You want to be flexible enough to change paths midstream and still have the outcome work to your best advantage. And then travel. Travel's on here. It's not necessarily something that I mean in the physical sense the way Victor did. He stayed on top of opportunities because he was traveling around. The con that he did in Paris could only have happened in Paris because it dealt with the Eiffel Tower. Similar to, I'm sure you've heard stories of con artists selling like the Brooklyn Bridge to people who didn't know better. It's a similar con, but he traveled around looking for opportunities, and what we can do now on the internet is it's beneficial to travel outside of circles that you're normally involved in. I participate in lots of hobbies, and they come and go. I will spend like 6 months totally obsessed with some new thing, like motor scooters or collecting records or any of these things, and they stick with me. I follow them for a long time, but I have pockets of very intense interest. So I'll go and get involved in all kinds of communities online and read all kinds of blogs and forums and things like that. But I learn a lot by doing those things, seeing these weird little niche audiences that self-form for their own interests. You can learn a lot as a marketer, as a persuader, as a business person by being a person who sort of just jumps into communities and tries to become a figure of interest, a figure of note there. So that's well worth practicing too. And that's sort of a virtual travel that will do the same thing that Victor's actual travel did. And of course, there's actual travel too, but I know not everybody watching has that ability. Let's see. Efficiency. Efficiency, again, con artists have very short amounts of time to be able to pull things off. And again, in that newsletter and the upcoming webinar about mastery, 2 concepts I talked about were layering activities so that you could do multiple things at once. An example would be I mentioned I have a newsletter and that the article for that newsletter is going to be in a book. And I got a webinar, a paid training webinar out of that same material. And now I'm talking about it on a free web show that's also going to end up being a podcast, all of which leads people into my group. So one little piece of material that I wrote as an article has a lot of layers of benefit because I'm doing a lot of different things with that one piece of content. The other concept I talked about is ordering tasks in a certain way so that you get maximum benefit. So for example, if I wanted to write an article about Victor Lustig, for example, instead of me writing it and then doing a show about it like we're doing now, I could take the recording of this show, pay someone like on Fiverr very cheap to transcribe it, and then I can pay someone else very cheap to be an editor and put it together so it makes sense as a book and not just the transcription, not a book, an article. That sequence, being aware of that sequence where it's easier to take a transcript of a live video and turn it into an article versus writing an article and then trying to make a video. I couldn't do it backwards, right? Like if I wrote the article first, I can't hire someone to turn it into a video of me. I have to do that part. But if you do it the other way, I make the video first, I can easily outsource turning that into text content. So that's what I mean about ordering things the right way for maximum efficiency. So some things that Victor was efficient about that I thought was unique. So I mentioned he got all those guys together at a dinner, right? All the scrap metal dealers in Paris. He invited them all to a dinner to talk to them all at once. Now, that made sense with his cover story because it was like a hush-hush deal and they wanted bids. But from a selling standpoint, what that was really about was to sort of get them aware that there was a competition and they wanted to kind of conspire against each other to get the deal. And then on top of that, Victor didn't have a lot of time. So he needed to get them all in the same room and very quickly figure out which one of all his potential marks was the most gullible one to trick. So getting them all in the same room was beneficial just for saving him time. Like he didn't have to meet with each one of them individually, put them all in the same room. It became very clear which one was the most insecure, easily duped guy. And it set the context where all of them wanted to kind of keep it quiet because they were in competition with each other, right? Let's see. Also, what this did by putting all these people in the room that way, you can think of it as a reversal of a pitch. So he wasn't trying to sell them on the idea of, hey, we're going to go into business together and you should give me some money. He wasn't asking for them to invest. He was taking bids for a project, and it put them in the selling position. They had to sell him on getting the business. So he no longer had to be the person doing the convincing. they had to be the ones in the position where they have to sell. Now, in business, you can actually do this in a lot of ways. I mentioned being very selective of your clientele and being limited on your time. If I were to say something like, I'm reopening one of my copy review spots, which have improved people's results by as much as 75%, resulting in hundreds of thousands of dollars in additional sales, but I only have 3 spots, and you need to contact me and tell me why I should let you have those spots. That would be an example. I'm not doing that. I don't do copy reviews anymore. But that would be an example of what I mean, where you put a limitation on it, and then now your client has to convince you why you should accept their business and allow them to give you money, which may seem counterintuitive, but if you actually do deliver a good service and you're a good value for your customers and you have their best interests in mind, there's nothing wrong with you taking that psychologically more powerful position, even though con artists use it too, right? Like whether or not it's ethical comes in on what your intent is. I don't think there's anything wrong with tricking people to a certain degree, as long as you're actually giving them what you said you would give them, and it's fair, and they like it, right? No one ever complained, boy, I sure love that thing you gave me, but I wish you wouldn't have tricked me into buying it even though it's so great. No one ever says that. Let's see. I don't see any more comments coming in, but I'll hit refresh. Maybe I'm just missing them. Or maybe not. Maybe you guys are just quiet. That's cool. Another point on efficiency that Victor had was that the format matched the delivery. So I mentioned having this group meeting to get all these guys together to bid on the scrap project matched the con, in that if he really was a secret officer on the government's behalf who was trying to put together this project without anyone in the public finding out, this is a legitimate way he would go about it, right? So he set up the context to match what it is he was telling them in a story. A business example of that would just be being aware of like the context of a meeting, or the context of setting up an online sale where, for example, a lot of my materials are meant to be for professionals. They're not for the public, the stuff that I sell. So I don't bother making fancy packaging or titles, or like my slide. I don't even do slides. They don't have decorations. They're not pretty. And that works to my advantage because it matches what they are. They're not meant to be pretty. They're not meant to be nice so the public feels good about having bought it. It's professional tools for professional writers who create sales material. So the presentation is meant to match what it is that I'm putting on offer. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's see. Next we have meeting expectations. So we talked about how what Victor set up was a context and a character and a scenario that all made sense to his audience that he was trying to persuade to put in these bids. When he finally picked the guy that was the most gullible, it worked exactly like he wanted. No one who he turned down thought to even investigate whether what he was saying was true. No one reported him to the police the first time. But his victim's wife was suspicious. And this is the brilliance of Victor Lustig as far as giving people what they expect. When his wife was suspicious, he came back to Victor to tell him he had second thoughts. And what Victor did, instead of trying to instill confidence the way you would normally think of, what he did instead was say, listen, here's the deal. I really want you to have the job, but here's the thing. I'm just a poor government worker, and I don't really get paid a lot. So if you could throw in something to make the deal a little sweeter for me, I could make sure that you get the contract. So basically, he solicited a bribe on top of the bid money that he was getting. And not only did he make more profit that way, but it made his victim more confident because it was giving them what they expected. Of course, he's asking for a bribe because he's a government official. And since he's asking for a bribe, it must be true, right? Like, only a government official would be so obnoxious to ask for a bribe on top of a bid. So it fit what his victim was expecting. Now, in a business sense, it's beneficial to give your customers what they are expecting when you create any kind of context. So an example would be lots of people make the mistake of building up a list, an email list, off of selling a product. So I sell you a product, you get on my email list as a customer, and then all of a sudden I start emailing you promotions, right? Lots of unsubscribes. People get unhappy about it. They say you're spamming them, even though technically, according to the legal definition of spam, you're not. But what if you just created the expectation that they're going to get email from you by saying, hey, you're on my newsletter list as a freebie when you buy, and if you don't like it, just cancel. But it's free, and you'll get it as part of this deal. Then it's a free thing that they're getting, and they're happy to get the email. Instead of being mad, you still get what you want. You still get to send them email, and hopefully they'll open it and read and buy stuff from you. But instead, you created a context where now when they get the email, you're meeting an expectation they had instead of subverting it. You're not giving them something they don't expect. You're matching up with expectations. Of course, you're the one who created that expectation, just like Victor created the presentation that he was a greedy government worker from the beginning. But that's one way you can benefit, by setting up and meeting expectations that your audience has. Let's see. Finally, we have repetition. Now, this failed for Victor, right? But the trick is, most of the time in business, at least in the fields that I operate in, a lot of times people will get the idea for creating a product, and then they put a lot of effort and thought into launching the product, open up big, have lots of partners promoting it, get a lot of traffic, and then when you're done, you close it down and then look for the next opportunity. Well, if it worked the first time as a launch, why not go maybe do some smaller private launches if it's the kind of thing where you very publicly pulled it off the market? Or you could also set it up as an evergreen product, which means it's for sale forever. So set up some kind of opt-in mechanism where you give away a freebie and then let them get more email notices to drive them to buy your product, and you could set up automated advertising to drive people into that funnel. But the point is, if it worked the first time, do it again, right? Now, it didn't work for Victor because, like I said, one of his marks was suspicious enough to investigate, and he was found out and had to flee Paris, and he did get away, but he didn't get his bid money that time. Obviously, now that his scam was revealed, being so specific to the Eiffel Tower in Paris, he of course couldn't do it a third time because it had been publicized and probably ran in the newspaper and this kind of thing. But the brazenness of attempting something so insane twice, I don't want to say admirable because he was a crook, but it's impressive that he was that ballsy going after something that was profitable and worked the first time. So the lesson for us as, profitable internet figures is don't make the mistake of only doing something once if it works. If it works, great. Figure out a way to repeat it, do it over and over again. Preferably automate it if you can, and profit forever, right? Why not? I guess that goes back to that point about efficiency, too. So let's see. I believe that is the end of our notes. What I have here is that this would be where I do ad spot number 2. So in the future, when I sell advertisements, you could get one here too. But again, I'm just going to use it as a house advertisement. To remind you that Wednesday, April 9th at 2 p.m. Eastern, I'm having a webinar on the subject of mastery, how to gain it quickly, and more importantly, how to effectively portray it to your audience so they can tell that you are a master of whatever it is that you're talking about. And we're going to be talking about shortcuts that don't require you to spend 10,000 hours or whatever to master a skill first. This is a knowledge-based mastery that you can acquire and portray very quickly. Again, it's $50 if you're not a newsletter subscriber. If you want to subscribe to the newsletter, it's $20 per month. But the issue that you get if you sign up right now has a coupon to get that webinar for $20. The recording of that webinar will be available after, but it will be more than $50, so it's cheaper to buy it now. If you're listening to this recording at some far-flung time in the future, if you go to colinterrio.com/mastery, COLINTHERIOT.com/mastery, that's the shortcut link to currently buy the $50 version. If you don't, I'm sorry, if this is far enough in the future where the live events already happen, that URL will instead point to where you can buy the recording. So if you're still interested in it and it's already happened, you can pick it up. If you want to subscribe to the newsletter, again, if you're listening to this after this live event happened, the coupon will do you no good. But if you do want to subscribe to the newsletter now or at any time, it is at same URL, colinterrio.com/cult-newsletter. If you want to just join our group, which if you're going to subscribe to the newsletter, you should, because there are links to content in the group. It's a free group. You can join us at cultofcopy.com, and that will redirect you currently to our Facebook group page where you can request to join. And if your personal profile isn't all full of spam or weird stuff, I'll generally let you in. So there's, at the time of this recording, like 6,500 of us and counting. So pretty good-sized group. We got good content in there, not a lot of spam. Hopefully, if you like the stuff we talked about today and you're not already a member, we can see you in there. If you do like the stuff that we talked about today and you are already a member of the cult, maybe you'll get the newsletter and maybe join me on one of my paid webinars. If not, no big deal. But I think that is it for today. We're at right around 3 o'clock. The show's going on for about an hour. I think that's good enough, man. So thanks you guys for joining me on the first episode of the Cult of Copy Show. We will call this an end, and I will see you next Thursday at the same time. Not at the exact same place. It will be a different URL, but I will spread that one around, and if you subscribe to the channel, I'm sure you'll get a notification when I set up the new one. For now, I'm going to see if anyone had any questions or comments here. It doesn't look like it. I keep refreshing it. Maybe I just am terrible at getting people to leave comments. But again, super happy to have had you guys. If you have any questions or comments and you are in the group, post in there. We'll get answers and you know, jokes, abuse, anything like that. Oh, here we go. Let's see. I hit refresh, and now all of a sudden, like, comments are coming in from hours ago. 45-second delay. That's way more. All right. Well, that's it, you guys. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you guys next week.